Welcome to my story. I don't know why I am recording this. Maybe it's because keeping a secret like this inside your own head for so long starts to feel like a poison. It eats away at you, slowly, until you don't even recognize the person staring back at you in the mirror. My name is Emma. I am 35 years old, and I have been divorced for 3 years. 3 years of waking up in a silent apartment, drinking coffee in silence, and going to bed in silence. You think you get used to the quiet, but you don't. You just learn to tolerate it. You learn to wear your loneliness like a heavy coat that you can never quite take off. Then there is Sarah. Sarah is my best friend. We met in our freshman year of college, and we have been inseparable ever since. Sarah is the kind of woman who walks into a room and instantly absorbs all the light. She is loud, she is vibrant, and she has a life that looks like it was cut out of a magazine. She has the beautiful house in the suburbs, the golden retriever, and of course, the perfect husband. David. David is. Well, David always felt like a shadow in Sarah's blinding light. He is quiet. He is an architect, the kind of man who thinks before he speaks, which means around Sarah, he rarely speaks at all. For years, I just saw him as an extension of her. Sarah and David, they were a single entity. I never looked at him closely. I never had a reason to. To me, he was just the guy who poured the wine at their dinner parties and smiled politely while Sarah told another exaggerated story about her week. I thought my life was set in its depressing little routine. I really did. I thought the most exciting thing that would happen to me was trying a new brand of tea. But life has a funny way of punishing you for getting too comfortable in your own misery. It happened on a Tuesday, a cold, miserable, relentless Tuesday in November. It had been raining for 3 days straight, the kind of rain that makes the sky look bruised and heavy. I was in my oldest, most pathetic sweatpants, curled up on the couch with a glass of cheap red wine. I was watching some terrible reality show, not really paying attention, just letting the noise fill the empty space in my living room. The clock on the microwave said 11:34 p.m. When the doorbell rang, I actually jumped. Nobody rings a doorbell at 11:30 on a Tuesday night. My first thought was that it was an emergency. My second thought was that it was a mistake. I muted the TV, set my wine glass down on the coffee table, and walked slowly to the door. I looked through the peephole. The hallway light was flickering, casting weird shadows, but I could clearly see a man standing there. He was soaked. His hair was plastered to his forehead, and water was dripping from his dark jacket onto my welcome mat. It was David. My heart did a strange little stutter. Why was Sarah's husband standing outside my apartment in the middle of the night, alone, looking like he had just walked through a hurricane? Panic immediately set in. Something had happened to Sarah. There had been a car accident. Something was terribly wrong. I unlocked the deadbolt with trembling hands and pulled the door open. David, I breathed, my voice barely more than a whisper. What's wrong? Is it Sarah? Is she okay? He didn't answer right away. Eddie? He just stood there, breathing heavily, chest rising and falling. His eyes met mine, and for the first time in the 10 years I had known him, I really looked into them. They weren't just brown. They were deep, exhausted, and filled with an intensity that completely threw me off balance. Sarah's fine, he finally said. His voice was deeper than I remembered, slightly hoarse from the cold. She's at home, fast asleep. I stood there, blinking stupidly. Then, what are you doing here? It's the middle of the night, David. You're freezing. He slowly raised his hands. I hadn't noticed because they were tucked against his stomach, but he was holding something. It was wrapped tightly in a plastic grocery bag, shielding it from the rain. He carefully unwrapped the plastic, his large hand surprisingly gentle, and held the object out to me. It was a small, intricately carved wooden box. I stopped breathing. Literally, the air just caught in my throat. I stared at the box, my mind violently spinning, trying to process what I was looking at. It was my grandmother's music box. When I moved out of the house I shared with my ex-husband 2 years ago, I lost it. It was the only thing I had left of my grandmother, a beautiful vintage piece that played a melancholic waltz. Losing it had completely broken me. I tore through boxes, I called the movers. I even drove past my old house just crying in the car. It was gone. I had mentioned it exactly once. 6 months ago. We were at a dinner party at Sarah's house. I had drank a little too much wine and got unnecessarily emotional. I told the story of losing the box. Sarah had rolled her eyes affectionately, patted my hand, and said, "Oh, it's just a thing. You'll buy a prettier one?" I had looked down at my plate, feeling stupid and invisible. But David had been sitting across from me. He hadn't said anything. He had just looked at me. And now, here he was, standing in my doorway, holding it. How? Oh. I choked out, reaching out with shaking fingers to touch the damp wood. "How did you get this?" "I remembered the description you gave," David said quietly, his eyes never leaving my face. "You said it had a small chip on the bottom left corner and a brass clasp shaped like a leaf. I've been checking antique stores, online auctions, estate sales, anywhere I could think of. Every weekend for the last 6 months. My head spun. Every weekend for the last 6 months. Sarah's husband had spent the last 6 months secretly searching for my lost music box. "I finally found it today," he continued, his voice soft, almost intimate in the quiet hallway. "A dealer 2 towns over had it. I bought it. I was going to wait and give it to you for your birthday." He paused, swallowing hard. "But I couldn't wait. I knew you were sitting here alone. I wanted you to have it tonight." I didn't know what to say. The magnitude of what he had done was crashing over me like a tidal wave. My best friend had dismissed my pain in a heartbeat, but her husband had carried it with him for half a year. "David, I started, but a tear slipped down my cheek before I could finish the sentence. He reached out, instinctively, and his thumb brushed against my cheek, catching the tear. His skin was freezing cold from the rain, but where he touched me, it felt like a match had been struck. A jolt of electricity shot straight through my chest. He pulled his hand back quickly, as if he had burned himself. We both froze. The air between us suddenly felt incredibly heavy, thick, charged with something terrifying and completely undeniable. "You're freezing," I whispered, stepping back and pulling the door wider. "Come inside. Let me get you a towel." He hesitated for a fraction of a second. We both knew, on some unspoken primal level, that if he crossed that threshold, something was going to permanently shift. The line between Sarah's husband and David was about à blur. He stepped inside, and he closed the door behind him. I walked to the bathroom to get a towel, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were wide. My cheeks were flushed. I didn't look like the lonely, invisible woman from 20 minutes ago. I looked awake. When I walked back into the living room, he was standing by the window, looking out at the rain. He had taken his wet jacket off. He looked so out of place in my small feminine apartment. He looked large, masculine, present, I handed him the towel. "Thank you," he said, taking it and drying his hair. "I don't know how to thank you," I said, clutching the music box to my chest. This means more to me than I can ever explain. But David, why? Why did you do this for me? He stopped drying his hair. He let the towel drop to his side and turned to face me. The distance between us was only a few feet, but it felt like a magnetic field. Because, Emma, he said, his voice incredibly quiet, you deserve to have someone look for the things you've lost. You deserve to be noticed. I stopped breathing again. You deserve to be noticed. In that single sentence, the entire foundation of my life, my friendship with Sarah, my understanding of who this man was, all of it began to crack. I went to the kitchen to make coffee. I needed a distraction. I needed to put physical distance between us. My hands were shaking so badly, I dropped the coffee scoop. As I knelt down to pick it up, he was suddenly there. He knelt down beside me. Our knees brushed. He picked up the scoop and handed it to me. His hand covered mine for a second longer than necessary. I'm sorry, he whispered, looking into my eyes. For what? I breathed back. For noticing you, he said. Because now that I have, I don't know how to stop. I pulled my hand back, as if I had been stung by a wasp. My heart was beating so fast and so loud I was sure he could hear it over the sound of the rain, lashing against the kitchen window. You can't say that, I said, my voice shaking uncontrollably. David, you cannot say that to me. You are married to Sarah. Sarah is my best friend. She was the maid of honor at my wedding. She held my hand when my mother died. I know, he said, standing up slowly. He looked completely defeated, like a man who had been carrying a heavy weight for miles and finally dropped it. Emma, God, I know. Do you think I haven't tortured myself over this? Do you think I haven't spent the last 6 months trying to convince myself that I was just being a good friend by looking for that music box? I backed up against the kitchen counter, crossing my arms over my chest, trying to hold myself together. The air in the room felt too thin to breathe. You need to leave, I told him, pointing a trembling finger toward the hallway. You brought the box. I am incredibly grateful. But you need to put your wet jacket back on, walk out that door, and we are going to pretend this conversation never happened. David did not move toward the door. Instead, he took one step closer to me, not in a threatening way, but in a way that pleaded for me to just listen. Sarah and I haven't slept in the same bed in 2 years, Emma, he said softly. The words hung in the air, heavy and shocking. I stared at him, my mouth slightly open. What are you talking about? You guys. You're the perfect couple. You just went to Italy for your anniversary. David let out a harsh, bitter laugh. It didn't sound like him at all. Italy. Right. Do you want to know what happened in Italy? Sarah spent 4 hours every day setting up the perfect tripod shots for her Instagram. When the camera was off, she didn't speak to me. She sat on the balcony of a 5-star hotel in Positano, drinking Bellinis and texting her sister, while I walked the streets alone. We are a photograph, Emma. We are a beautifully framed photograph, with absolutely nothing behind the glass. I didn't know what to say. My entire reality regarding my best friend's life was shattering in front of my eyes. Sarah had come back from that trip glowing, showing me hundreds of pictures of them smiling on boats and eating gelato. She doesn't see me, David continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. She sees a husband. She sees an accessory that fits perfectly into the aesthetic of her life. But she doesn't see me. Not the way I am. Not the things I care about. He paused, his brown eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my knees weak. But you do. I lied, my voice cracking. I don't even know you, David. You do, he insisted gently. When we are all sitting at that massive dining table of hers, and she's dominating the conversation, you're the only one who looks over at me. You're the only one who asks me about my architectural projects. You remember the names of the buildings. In designing. Sarah doesn't even know what city my current project is in. He was right. I felt a hot flush of guilt rush up my neck. I didn't notice him. For years, I had quietly observed the way he was constantly overshadowed by his wife. I had felt sorry for him. I had admired his patience. I had, in some deep, unacknowledged corner of my mind, thought that if I ever met a man who looked at me the way David tried to look at Sarah, I would be the luckiest woman in the world. Please, I whispered, tears welling in my eyes again. David, please, don't do this. I have nothing left in my life. Sarah is the only family I have. If I lose her, if I do something to betray her, I will have nothing. You won't lose her, he said, stepping even closer. The smell of the rain on his clothes, mixed with his cologne, something woody and sharp, was intoxicating. I'm not asking you to betray her, Emma. I'm not asking to sleep with you. He stopped, running a frustrated hand through his damp hair. I just couldn't be in that house tonight. I couldn't sit in that cold, silent living room while she scrolled on her phone, knowing you were sitting here alone in the rain, grieving over a lost memory that I had sitting in the trunk of my car. He looked exhausted, deeply, fundamentally exhausted. Sit down, I said softly, the fight suddenly draining out of me. I couldn't kick him out into the storm. Not when he looked like that. We moved to the living room. I sat on one end of my small gray sofa, and he sat on the other. The music box sat on the coffee table between us, a silent witness to whatever this was becoming. I poured him a glass of the cheap red wine I had been drinking. He took it with a nod of thanks. For the next 3 hours, we talked. And I don't mean the kind of polite, surface-level conversation we had engaged in for the last 10 years at dinner parties. We talked him. He told me about his childhood, about how he always wanted to build things that would last forever, because his own family had fallen apart so quickly. I told him about my divorce. I told him about the exact moment I realized my ex-husband no longer loved me on a big dramatic fight, but a quiet Tuesday morning when he made coffee and only poured 1 cup. David listened. He didn't just hear the words, he listened to the spaces between them. He asked questions that made me think. He laughed at my terrible, self-deprecating jokes. At 2:45 a.m., the storm outside seemed to hit a peak. Thunder rattled the window panes, and the lights in my apartment flickered before dying completely. We were plunged into darkness, save for the faint orange glow of the street lamp filtering through the blinds. In the dark, the distance between us on the sofa felt suddenly non-existent. Are you afraid of the dark? His voice came from the shadows, smooth and low. No, I answered, my heart rate picking up again. Are you? Only of the things it makes me want to do. He replied. I stopped breathing. I could hear the rustle of his clothes as he shifted on the sofa. I could feel the heat radiating from his body. Then, in the pitch black of my living room, I felt his hand gently cover mine in the dark. I didn't pull away. God forgive me, I didn't pull away. I just let his large warm hand hold mine. It was the most intimate thing I had experienced in 3 years. It felt like salvation. It felt like ruin. Emma, he whispered, my name sounding like a prayer in his mouth. What are we doing? I don't know. I whispered back into the dark. I really don't know. The lights flickered back on with a sudden, blinding harshness. The sudden illumination felt like a physical blow. We both blinked, pulling our hands away from each other instantly. The magic of the dark completely shattered by the unforgiving fluorescent bulb of my kitchen spilling into the living room. I looked down at my lap, suddenly feeling incredibly exposed. My cheeks were burning. I felt like a criminal caught in the act, even though all we had done was hold hands. But we both knew it was more than that. We had crossed an invisible line that could never be uncrossed. David cleared his throat, looking at the time on his phone. The screen illuminated his face. It was 3:42 a.m. "I should go," he said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite decipher. "Before the roads flood completely." "Yes," I agreed quickly, standing up so fast I almost lost my balance. "You should." Sarah tut einte. Tauneng desa drengen. Sarah will wake up soon. Saying her name out loud was a bucket of ice water. It brought all the reality, all the guilt, rushing back into the room. David's jaw tightened. "Indo dem saliwa. Bad idea." He picked up his still damp jacket from the back of the armchair and put it on in silence. I walked him to the door. The hallway was quiet again. He opened the door, but didn't immediately step through it. He turned to look at me one last time. There was a desperation in his eyes that terrified me. "Emma," he said softly. "Don't," I pleaded, shaking my head. "Please, David, don't say anything else tonight. Just go home." He nodded slowly. "I'm glad you have your music box back," he said. And then he walked out into the rain. I locked the door and leaned my back against the cold wood, sliding down until I was sitting on the floor. I pulled my knees to my chest and finally started to cry. I cried for my lost marriage. I cried for my best friend who didn't know her husband's heart. And I cried for myself because I knew with absolute certainty that I had just fallen in love with him. The next morning, the storm had passed. The sun was shining harshly through the blinds, giving me a massive headache. I woke up on the sofa, stiff and disoriented. For a split second, I thought it had all been a bizarre, lonely dream. But then I looked at the coffee table. The music box was there. I reached out and opened it. The tiny, mechanical ballerina spun to life, playing the melancholic waltz I hadn't heard in 2 years. It was real. All of it. At 10:00 a.m., my phone rang. The caller ID flashed brightly. Azerabaton. My stomach plummeted. My hands started shaking again as I answered the phone. "Hello, but," I croaked, trying to sound normal. "Oh my God, you sound terrible. Did you catch a cold in that awful storm?" Sarah's voice was loud, cheerful, and completely oblivious. Yeah, I think I didn't sleep well," I managed to say. "Well, you're not the only one. David has been in a horrible mood all morning," she sighed dramatically. "He woke up early, went for a run in the mud, and hasn't said 2 words to me. Honestly, sometimes living with an architect is like living with a brooding teenager." I felt physically sick. The guilt hit me so hard I had to lean against the kitchen counter to stay upright. She was complaining about the man who had spent the night pouring his heart out to me. She had no idea. "He's probably just stressed about work," I lied. It was the first time I had ever lied to Sarah. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. Probably. She dismissed it easily. Anyway, I was thinking we should do brunch on Sunday. You, me, and David. I need to get out of this house. Are you in? My heart stopped. Sitting at a table with both of them, after last night? I didn't think I could survive it. But saying no would be suspicious. I never said no to Sarah. "Sure," I said weakly. Sunday sounds great. Sunday brunch was a masterclass in psychological torture. We met at a trendy bistro downtown. Sarah looked flawless, as usual, talking endlessly about a new interior designer she hired for her guest bedroom. I tried to focus on my avocado toast, nodding and making agreeable noises at the right times. David sat across from me. He was quiet. He didn't look at me directly, but I could feel his presence like a physical weight pressing against my chest. Every time Sarah looked away, his eyes would flick to mine, just for a second. But in that second, There was a whole universe of unspoken words. I remember. I am here. I see you. Under the table. Entirely hidden by the long white tablecloth, his knee accidentally brushed against mine. Neither of us pulled away. We sat there, my best friend talking about throw pillows, while her husband and I shared a silent, agonizing secret in the dark space beneath the table. It was intoxicating, and it was destroying me. Weeks turned into months. The dynamic of our lives shifted entirely, though to the outside world, nothing had changed. We never crossed the physical line again. There were no secret hotel rooms, no stolen kisses in parking lots. The affair we were having was entirely emotional, which somehow made it feel infinitely more dangerous. It was in the texts he would send me during his lunch breaks. Not flirty, just intimate. He saw a book today that reminded me of what you said about your father. I bought it. I'll give it to you next time. It was in the way he would casually stand between me and a crowded room at parties, creating a small protective bubble just for us. It was in the way he knew exactly how I took my coffee, while Sarah still bought me the wrong brand. But a secret like that is a parasite. It feeds on your sanity. The guilt of lying to Sarah was eating me alive. I started losing weight. I couldn't sleep. Every time she hugged me, I felt like Judas. I was living a double life. This supportive best friend on the outside, and the woman desperately in love with her husband on the inside. The breaking point came on New Year's Eve. Sarah threw a massive party at their house. Everyone was there. At midnight, as the countdown began, the room erupted into cheers. I watched from the corner of the room as Sarah grabbed David by the neck and kissed him for the cameras. She looked perfect. I couldn't breathe. I grabbed my coat and slipped out the back door into the freezing night air. I walked to the edge of their manicured lawn, the cold biting into my lungs, gasping for air. I needed to leave. I needed to move to another city. I couldn't do this anymore. The back door opened behind me. Footsteps crunched on the frost-covered grass. You left without saying goodbye? David's voice said. I didn't turn around. I kept my back to him, wrapping my coat tighter around myself. I have to go, David. I can't be here. He stepped closer. Emma, look at me. No, I cried, the tears finally spilling over. If I look at you, I won't leave. And I have to leave. This is killing me. You are killing me. I love her. She is my best friend. But I love you too. And it is tearing me apart. The words were out. The absolute, terrifying truth hanging in the freezing air between us. He didn't hesitate. He closed the distance between us, grabbed my shoulders, and turned me around. His face was full of an agony that mirrored my own. Then let's stop, he said fiercely. Let's stop pretending. I'll tell her, Emma. I'll tell her everything. I'll leave it turning. I stared at him, terrified by the sincerity in his voice. He meant it. He was willing to blow up his entire perfect life for me, the invisible woman. But as I looked at his face, at the house behind him, where my best friend was laughing and drinking champagne, I realized the ultimate tragedy of our situation. If he left her for me, the guilt would forever poison whatever we tried to build. Our foundation would be the destruction of the person I loved most in the world. I reached up and placed my hand against his cold cheek. I looked into the eyes of the only man who had ever truly seen me. You can't, I whispered, my voice breaking. And neither can I. Some secrets are just meant to be kept. I dropped my hand, turned around, and walked away into the dark. I never looked back. And that is my secret. I am the woman who walked away from the love of her life, so her best friend could keep a husband who didn't love her. And every night, I sit in my silent apartment. I open the wooden music box, and I listen to the melancholic waltz of the life I could have had.